Cleveland Browns trade for Za'Darius Smith. In a swap with the Minnesota Vikings, the Browns give up effectively a fifth-round pick for the best pass rusher that Myles Garrett has ever played with in his career. Previously, he started with Olivier Vernon and had Jadeveon Clowney most recently, and Za'Darius Smith at this point in his career compared to theirs is just better. It's a big deal move for the Browns. And by the way, it's just me this week, Breeze swamped with life. And I just figured I'd take a shot at this myself with everything that's going on. And I could weigh in on a few different things that are going on this week. So we'll see how this goes. But look, this is a big deal move. The Browns had already signed Ogbonnia Okoronkwo, widely believed an ascending pass rusher that was going to step in and start, and maybe he'd get a little help from the likes of Alex Wright and the rookie Isaiah McGuire when they need a little heft. But there was a time when, the hope was they'd get somebody like a Melvin Ingram to sort of supplement those guys. And apparently that was plan B if the Za'Darius Smith trade didn't work out, but they got him and he's a phenomenal talent. They're going to use all of them as often as possible. And this sort of switches the dynamic of the team a little bit. You now are a defense that is going to want to be in sub packages as often as possible. You're going to want Myles Garrett, Za'Darius Smith, and Ogbonnia Okoronkwo on the field together as much as you can do it. In order for that to happen, two things need to happen. You need to score points and get leads. And, the Browns are banking on the fact that they're going to get a much better Deshaun Watson in addition to all the things they've been doing on the offensive side of the ball. Adding Elijah Moore, adding Cedric Tillman, keeping most of these other guys intact, keeping the offensive line strong with the re-signing of Ethan Posick and drafting DeJuan Jones and Luke Whippler to bolster that group, but just continuing to keep that side strong so that that Watson's in the best possible situation to succeed. And if they can get up 14 points, those three pass rushers are never going to leave the field. They're just going to constantly bring pressure the entire game. The other way this happens is by stopping the run. And obviously this has been the biggest issue for the Browns recently in the last couple of years. They've had dogs at just god-awful play on the interior of the defensive line. I talked about this last year that, the Browns, because of the way the Deshaun Watson deal worked out, that they didn't know it was done until, free agency was well underway. They couldn't really operate at that point. And then they get Amari Cooper and Deshaun Watson. And then at that point, you have a whole bunch of free agents that have either already decided where they're going, or B, they're not really interested in going to the Browns because uncertainty. Nobody knows what's going to happen with Watson's situation. Ultimately, he didn't find out until training camp was going. He was going to be out 11 games. Teams or players, I should say, and agents don't like that level of uncertainty. They want to go to good situations that are going to be good for them right now. And Jacoby Brissett played his ass off last year, but no one was signing up going, I can't wait to get out there and play with Jacoby Brissett. As a result, you have players that want more money to come to Cleveland, and you have the Browns who are saying, okay, but we don't really want to pay this much for the insert player. So no, those deals aren't made, and they sort of pull their punches. And yes, they signed a couple of guys. They said they re-signed Jadeveon Clowney. They signed Taven Bryan. It's not like, the idea that the Browns were pulling their punches is falsely equated to tanking. That's not what they were doing. They obviously signed a bunch of extensions. They did some things with the salary cap, but they weren't going out there to lose. They just didn't go with all hands on deck with an all-in approach. You're seeing the difference now. You're seeing what they were waiting for. Now you've got Deshaun Watson who's coming back full season. There's a lot more enthusiasm for players wanting to come here. They can see what's happening in terms of this is a good opportunity. And we've talked about this endlessly on this podcast, but you don't have to like Deshaun Watson personally to understand what he can do for you financially as a football player. If he's going to make you more money and give you more success, you're going to probably look past it. Not NFL, not for long. If your average career is 3 years long, and the Browns are going to be able to extend that for you by playing with Deshaun Watson, you're going to do that. So it makes all the sense in the world. But anyway, they need to stop the run. They've signed Alvin Tomlinson. They drafted Siaki Ika. I have some questions with Ika as to whether he can really get it done, but I'm interested to see how it works. I like the idea that they're going to have him attack up the field as much as they are. I do think he's going to lose a good deal of weight. They want him to be that big force that can cause problems and move a guy off the line of scrimmage back into the backfield. I still think they needed a defensive tackle. I wrote an article this week about why I think Shelby Harris might be a really good idea on that front, because he's more of a pure run stopper. And by virtue of the fact that you're going to be more focused on sub packages, it's not as big of a deal to get a pass rushing 3 technique. And I know Jim Schwartz is a guy who typically wants as many pass rushers as he can get. But given the premium level of talent in his pass rushing arsenal, he may be fine with getting a pure run stopper to just make sure. And when you play the Pittsburgh Steelers and their newly upgraded left side of the offensive line and adding Darnell Washington to try to run the ball more, or you play the Ravens who may spread it out and still use what is a big offensive line to block for Lamar Jackson and the running backs, you have to be able to have an answer for that. It's all well and good if the Browns are up 14 points and the other team has to pass. It's a different world if it's suddenly, a tight ball game late in the game and the Browns can't get off the field because they need to play the run. The other advantage with a guy like Shelby Harris is he is somebody who's going to protect the linebackers, not unlike Tomlinson. So you get a little bit more of that free flowing action. JOK and Anthony Walker can fly free behind them and make tackles and all that good stuff. So, and look, they could still go for a guy like Matt Ioannidis, who's a better pass rusher at the expense of run defense. I just posited the idea that it might be better for them to just say, screw it, let's get a plugger in there and make sure we can get ourselves off the field and into those 3rd and long or 2nd and long obvious passing situations so they can pin their ears back and make plays. Along with that, there's been all this talk this week, the Smith trade. One, there's not a whole lot of NFL news necessarily right now. You're in sort of proclamation season and sort of various outlets, sort of trying to make some big projections as to where teams are going and all that stuff. It forced some people to take a look at the Browns. This big trade happens, relatively speaking. Za'Darius Smith's a big playmaker. He add him to this defense, and suddenly, people are looking around, going, "Wait a minute, we should probably take another look at the Browns." Mina Kimes was on NFL Live talking about how the Browns are going to be more aggressive on the back end of their defense, which is true. They're going to play a lot more man coverage, and yes, they do have guys who are better equipped to play in man. And obviously, the addition of Juan Thornhill as a true free is a big advantage of that. And she pointed out that the Browns EPA, that when they ran zone coverage, is something like 24th, and their EPA when they ran man coverage was 2nd, and their QB rating in man coverage was like the lowest in the league. And which immediately prompts people to go, well, Joe Woods is a jackass because he wasn't playing man coverage the whole time. I understand where, if you look at those numbers, you'd be like, it's galling. Why weren't they doing this more? And I'm sure on some level the percentages should have been different. The other part of that is if you just run man coverage and maybe you swap in some match and the occasional trap coverage and you have no pass rush, it's really easy for the quarterback to figure out what you're doing. There's not a whole lot of reading in man coverage. It's find the open guy. Mixing up your coverage is at least force the quarterback to be somewhat honest. And part of the reason the EPA against zone was so bad was because that's where they had their coverage busts, which would be another argument to play more man just to eliminate that and try to stop the bleeding, so to speak. But I think if the Browns just played man all last year, they wouldn't have been at 2nd in EPA. Now, it may have been pretty good. It may have been, or even average overall, better than what they would have been without it. But that's sort of the deal with having such a weak pass rush. It was Myles Garrett or nobody. That's why Jim Schwartz is set up for success here. Yes, he's going to play man coverage, and he's got these guys in Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome and Martin Emerson and Cameron Mitchell and AJ Green, all who can, play man coverage and maybe better at that element of the game. But now he has the pass rush to pay it off. And what his goal is and what his thought process is, which makes a ton of sense on a lot of levels, is if you're just running straight man, cover one, or some things like that, and throwing in some match looks, which is still basically man coverage, or cover three, which is still basically man coverage, and the occasional trap coverage, you have your corners playing, your DBs in general, just playing fast. You aren't asking them to think, which the old adage is you think you stink. So it just allows them to play faster. But what it's going to do on the front end, this is where, Jim Schwartz gets, if he's going to mix things up, it's going to be on his defensive line. He's going to run stunts in the form of loops and twists and stuff. But the advantage you have there is you still know where you're going as a defensive lineman. So what does that mean? You still get to play fast. So the whole defense is playing fast, even though Jim Schwartz has the front doing different things to try to confuse the quarterback, to get him thinking about extra stuff, to get the offensive line protection screwed up, to cause them problems, which only adds more potential stress to the quarterback. So instead of trying to fool the quarterback necessarily with coverages, and they may still do some of that, again, if they mix in the occasional trap coverage and you get a quarterback who makes a mistake, that could be an easy turnover. But overall, the goal here isn't necessarily to try to fool the quarterback as much as play fast as possible. So when you do things like loop Myles Garrett or line him up anywhere in the formation, then it's just that much more destructive because they don't have to read or do any of these other things. It's attack, attack, attack. This is one of the reasons why players love it. It's simple in that regard, and it just allows guys to compete, which is great. The thing that has come out since the Za'Darius Smith trade, which has been largely applauded, and rightfully so, is the element of, well, why is Za'Darius Smith on his fourth team now? You're starting to hear things like Albert Breer talking about, well, he's had his share of issues, that he sort of wore out his welcome with the Green Bay Packers, and the Minnesota Vikings were done with him, and Baltimore was pissed, understandably, that he agreed to sign a contract to go back to them, pulled out of the deal, and then went to Minnesota. We loved it as Browns fans, because we're sitting there going, yeah, the Ravens don't get their guy, but it's understandable why the Ravens would be pissed and why it wouldn't look good for it on the player. To that, I say, okay, yeah, like I get it. But there's a couple things here. First, Za'Darius Smith was in a situation where he had to agree to restructure his contract. So by virtue of that, he had the ability to sort of choose where he wanted to go. He picked Cleveland, but Cleveland was not the only suitor. And it would be really interesting to find out if Baltimore was one of the other ones. Because if they were, then him being a pain in the ass wasn't that big of a deal in the end if they still wanted him. And that's sort of the reality with this, is if they're good, teams will put up with you. The other part of this is that's why you hired Jim Schwartz. You hired this guy to hold these guys accountable. You hired this guy to be the adult in the room. And, the other part of that is the Browns have brought in a bunch of adults on this defense that can do more to hold their teammates accountable. We've talked about this before. Anthony Walker was basically dad to like 9 children last year on defense. They had so many young players that didn't know what they were doing and had no idea what it was to be a professional. And the Browns have brought in a ton of guys that now Anthony Walker doesn't have to do that. Juan Thornhill, grown up. Dalvin Tomlinson, a grown up and one that is regarded as a good locker room guy. And he's fresh off a team where he was just with Za'Darius Smith. So that may help on some level. Okoronkwo seems to be a high character player that they've added. So you get all these guys that can hopefully reduce the amount of reliance they have. I look at Perry and Winfrey, and my operating thought on this is I'm going to get enough players to make sure that if Perry and Winfrey is going to make this team, he's basically got to be a stud, because he wasn't good last year, wasn't good in college, and I'm not interested in babysitting him. The only thing he's proven to this point is he's entirely unreliable. So get as many guys as possible to make sure that if he's unreliable, you can cut bait. And I understand why the Browns aren't cutting him right now or trading him or whatever, because injuries happen and you want to have guys to get reps and you want that competition. And Perry and Winfrey can do all those things. But when, you start the season against the Cincinnati Bengals. I don't want to have to count on Perrion Winfrey. You can't. You just dysfunctional. So Mortaltz is a good thing, and that may help with Za'Darius Smith. In addition to that, he's in a contract year now with the way they restructured the deal. He's going to be a free agent after this year. He's got an incentive to behave like a professional. And obviously there's risk. Look, Jadeveon Clowney was in a contract year and still acted like a giant baby. So there's a risk with that. But the other part is you have a guy behind him in Okoronkwo. You didn't have that with Clowney. I mean, your next guy in was Alex Wright, and Alex Wright was a project who struggled. And, you know, he's got to have a big step up this year. Last year, he was bad, did not look like he belonged. So it hamstrung what you could really do in terms of, you know, holding a guy accountable. Having that competition with Okoronkwo over there makes it so there's more incentive for Smith to work. Between that and Myles Garrett and Jim Schwartz and all the other things they've got going on, it may be a little bit of a more likely situation for Za'Darius Smith to be, you know, sort of the good soldier and produce. But the other part of that is, you know, for all the things that Za'Darius Smith allegedly has done to sort of wear out his welcome, he's got 36 sacks in 49 games. Like, you know, there's something you're willing to put up with if as long as he's a pain in the ass to the opposing quarterback consistently, you can probably put up with a little bit of that. He averages 70 pressures a year. The Browns haven't had that across from Myles Garrett. So if he's 10 sacks and 70 pressures at the end of the year, you're going to be happy with that, even if he's, you know, a little bit of a bumpy ride getting him there. But the competition there should be valuable for that. And speaking of that, you know, I'm recording this on Wednesday. Juan Thornhill on Tuesday evening, he sort of crystallized the Cleveland experience pretty quickly, talking about how he wasn't really interested in the lack of optimism and doubters in Cleveland in a couple tweets. And it's interesting because, one, he's got our number. You know, you got fans in three different buckets in Cleveland. You've got the fans who are super optimistic and super excited about what's going on and can't wait for this thing to start. You've got the people who are convinced that nothing's ever going to work ever. You know, one would think they just, you know, go do something else, but they still invest a significant amount of time and probably money into this team. And then you've got that third bucket, and my co-host is trying like hell to stay in this bucket, although the Za'Darius Smith deal may have ruined that. Trying to be like, you know, I've heard all this before. I don't really want to, you know, show me something before I'm getting too invested. And I understand all that, and, you know, that's fine. But Juan Thornhill doesn't. And I can appreciate his situation. He played at Virginia, which wasn't very good, but his NFL career has been very fortunate. And, you know, obviously there's a knee injury mixed in there, but he's been in the league 4 seasons. His rookie year, Super Bowl. This past year, Super Bowl. So he's not accustomed to having as much doubt thrown around in his time with the Chiefs. But the other part of that is I like having the irrational optimism and confidence guy in Juan Thornhill. And, you know, John Johnson tried to be this guy in some ways. I think Juan Thornhill's a little bit better at it. He's very savvy with social media, and, you know, obviously got the tattoo and everything else. And he's done these things where, like, you know, when Greg Newsome was talking, you know, denying trade rumors that he probably actually made, you know, Juan Thornhill's immediate reaction was basically tweeting like, "I'm not letting him go anywhere." Like, he's very good at the gets us element of this thing. But the other part is, like, good. And he's not doing it in a way where it's like braggadocious or anything. He's basically saying, we're going to win. And the attitude thing, he's like, it changes with me. Great. Like, I'm all for that because it's we will win. It's not I will win or everything else. Even though he's putting himself out there, he's not doing it for anybody else. And he's not saying like, I'm going to be an all pro or anything else. He's entirely focused through team. And even though, like, we'd all probably rather the Browns have as quiet an offseason as possible. I'm okay with this because I think Thornhill is speaking for a lot of the players in that building. They're very excited. And why wouldn't they be? Because they've added all these players and they're the changes that have been made in that building, from coaches with Jim Schwartz and Bubba Ventrone to players they've added. They should be excited. And as long as that excitement turns into the work that is necessary, as opposed to just saying we're a top 5 defense to no one and not doing anything about it, then I'm good with it. I think that's important. And I think the fact that he's got a little bit of credibility with 2 rings helps. And the DBs need that guy. Like Denzel Ward is he's not that dude. Denzel Ward's a very talented player, and he seems like a very good guy in terms of like one-on-one type situation. He may be great in that DB's room, but like he's not that forceful. And you sort of saw that with John Johnson here. Like John Johnson really tried to be that leader and was just sort of very clunky with it. It was just never really worked. Whereas it feels, at least to this point, Juan Thornhill is doing the things. And look, he's been here 20 minutes. I get it. It's all lovey-dovey right now. Everything's great because they haven't done anything yet. And if he stinks, he's going to hear about it. But for right now, with everything that's going on this defense and team in general, I'm good with it. The other part that sort of goes with that is I am a major advocate of Andrew Berry. When other people were sitting there and saying, well, the record and 1-31, and why should we hire him as a GM? I was out there saying, no, you want this guy to be your GM. And we're in year 4. He's 36 years old. You can look at the last 2 years in the records and you can say, well, what's he really doing? I think for me, it's his process is really getting better. Like he's evolving quickly and he's doing a lot of things that good teams do. And he's finding value in places that other teams aren't necessarily finding value. And let's be honest, half of being a GM is not screwing up. And he's very good at not screwing up. And you can say, well, Jedrick Wills isn't that good. He's also not that bad either. And you can say that Austin Hooper didn't work. Okay. I mean, are we functionally at a disadvantage? Are the Browns at a disadvantage because Austin Hooper didn't work here? No, it didn't work. They got past it really quickly. I mean, that's why it was good that with Barry, is because they didn't dwell on it. They didn't try to make it work over and over again. They ripped the Band-Aid off, got his money off the cap, and they're done. That's behind them. And they've replaced him and they've made a lot of hits in those things. So they've been able to make real changes in free agency, getting guys like Jack Conklin, who was an all-pro his first year here. The big free agents some of those guys have worked. And again, John Johnson, another guy that didn't work, but it's not hurting you. It's not preventing you from operating, even if you wish you didn't spend the $9 million that you're going to eat or whatever in that contract. But the point is, you're able to get out of these contracts, out of the bad moves, and continue to make good ones. Then you get into things like, well, he found Ethan Posick, a guy that they paid practically the league minimum for, and now he's your starting center with a new contract. Like, that was found money. And you added a guy like Luke Whippler behind him, who I think has potential the ability to be a starter down the road. It's making smart decisions and following a prudent process. You find Ethan Posick, you get lucky, great. You draft behind him to make sure that it's not a fluke. Like, that's just smart, good stuff. They did it with a good pick. It was the 6th round on a guy that I think talent-wise is better than that, but I get it why he was there. He's obviously done great with trades. The big one hanging out there is Deshaun Watson and all the assets that went there, and everything's going to ride on whether he's successful or not. But Amari Cooper, 5th round pick for, the Cowboys didn't want him anymore, so the Browns took him. He had 9 touchdowns and 1,100 yards in his first season. Outstanding return on the investment. Za'Darius Smith, you give up effectively what is a 5th round pick. Even if he never sets foot on the field, it's a win, just in terms of that is the right type of gamble to take. And because the Browns have managed their cap so well, it allows you to do these type of things. You're not constantly bumping up against the cap. So if a team's sitting there and they're in cap trouble, like the Vikings were, they couldn't sign their draft picks until they got rid of Za'Darius Smith, then you have the opportunity to pounce on this opportunity. If it doesn't work, it hurts you a little bit in the fact that you're paying him some money, but it's the exact type of swing you want to take. DeJuan Jones is the exact type of swing you want to take. And, for all the potential issues with weight and football character and all this stuff, you saw him in minicamp. If you watch any of that stuff, and he looks really good moving around at that size. Like, he's unbelievable. And Bill Callahan's getting excited, getting him in a left tackle stance and having him do stuff. He moves really, really well. He looks like he's lost weight already. And it's terrifying. And he's standing next to Tyrone Wheatley Jr., who's listed 6'6", 320. And it looks like his little brother. It's just enormous. So, and if DeJuan Jones completely fails, you give a 4th round pick. But if he succeeds, he's going to be worth more. Let's say he hits the top end. He's going to be a very good starting tackle in the league. You're going to get more value out of that, almost certainly, than either of the Lions' 1st round picks. So, these are the bets you want to take. These are the moves you want to make. Dalvin Tomlinson, can you complain a little bit about how much money was involved? Sure. But overall, Okoronkwo, great contract. You're getting some of these other players like Rodney McLeod at the money he's making is the league minimum again, is stealing. These are huge wins for you. Keeping Anthony Walker to league minimum is a win. These are major players that are can be very good football players. They're not just guys. These are guys who have been very successful at a high level, and you've got them on practically nothing contracts that are just going to bolster your team. So Kevin Stefanski is going to sink or swim based on the season. Ultimately, I think he will succeed. I think the Browns are going to make the playoffs. But if I'm just looking at this, and this is where I sort of disagree with people. People are saying, well, let's wait to see what happens with Andrew Berry's players this year to see if they work. To me, I've seen enough. He's your GM for a very, very long time, as far as I'm concerned. He's doing all these things correctly. I think if he leans into the draft the way they did this past year, even more, they've always sort of emphasized premium positions and money spots in the draft. And then this year they went really far with that. And I love it because it just makes sense on all these levels. You didn't pick until, and this would be true even if you had 1st and 2nd round picks. I mean, the Browns' first round picks since he's been here have been tackle and corner premium spots. Keep taking swings at those things the entire draft. Here or there, you take a maintenance position the way they did with center and defensive tackle. Those are certainly worthwhile investments. But ultimately, you are swinging on picks that if they hit, you're gonna save huge in terms of building up your roster, saving money on the cap, potentially now having trade assets for the future because those players are worth it. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who I really like. If he's here 3 years and teams are excited about him, you can trade him, and that's valuable. But let's say a guy like Isaiah McGuire is a good football player, but the Browns are good enough where they can't keep everybody. God forbid the Browns are so good that they have to let some of these guys walk. And now he walks and gets a pretty average defensive end contract, and then you're getting compensatory picks, as opposed to if you draft a linebacker, which, don't have a ton of value. Yes, there are some teams that prioritize them and pay them big contracts. But overall, the last umpteen linebackers that have been picked in the 1st round, none of them have been extended. It's just not a worthwhile position. So why are you emphasizing that in your draft process? Pick the positions that matter. And then this year they got to use those undrafted free agents to sort of bolster their roster. I love Lonnie Phelps, even though, of course, the Browns, I should make more of these proclamations because that Lonnie Phelps is going to make the team. So the Browns immediately upgrade. It's unfortunate the Browns didn't sign a undrafted defensive tackle because I would proclaim that guy would make the team so that suddenly Shelby Harris or Matt Ioannidis is in the building. But whether it's Ronnie Hickman, who's got a golden opportunity, or Tanner McCallister, or Charlie Thomas, or Mohamed Diabate, a pair of safeties and a pair of linebackers that are all really interesting. And it doesn't matter if three of them stink, but you get one good one, you're set. You've maximized the draft to an extent where you're now getting extra players out of it. And the Browns have done this a little bit, with their approach of signing an undrafted free agent to basically what is a equivalent to a 6th-round pick. They did this with AJ Green, the corner. They've done this a couple other times. That now that becomes an extension of what you're doing. And what's funny is teams are catching on and doing this across the league now. It's not to say that the Browns are like the first team to do this because other teams have done it, but it's become far more in vogue, and the Browns are one of the teams doing this. That's part of why I like Andrew Berry is, between him and then some of the stuff that Sashi Brown did before him, they're on the cutting edge in a lot of ways. They're finding ways to solve problems that are sort of creative and creating extra value for your team and additional avenues to find players and stuff. And I understand where people are coming from, and they go, well, the Browns haven't drafted that well under Andrew Berry. I don't necessarily agree. I understand why people are pissed about Jedrick Wills. He's the worst body language. It's frustrating to watch him. You just want to, choke him out. But he's super talented, and I understand it's always going to be like that because he's not Tristan Wirfs. And Tristan Wirfs, hey, I was there. I freaking called the pick when it was up there thinking, oh, this is a slam dunk. Of course it's going to be Tristan Wirfs, and they picked Jedrick Wills. He's certainly not a bad player. And, Grant Delpit's a talented player, and Greg Newsome is certainly a talented player. And you've got all these guys that are adding up. And I think as long as the Browns continue to make these process style picks, Martin Emerson's a phenomenal example. You picked him in the 3rd round and everybody's going, oh, I can't believe they took a corner. And then he's good because you played the board, you took a premium position. He's valuable by virtue of those things. And it just adds so much to your team. So even though really, so far, Martin Emerson's you've gotten out of that draft. Obviously, Cade York is sort of out there because he's the kicker. But Martin Emerson just in a draft where you didn't pick till the 3rd round, your draft looks pretty good because you got a starting caliber player in the 3rd round. And I think the more they do this, the hits are going to catch up just by, you're going to have some level of, hits and misses, a batting average type thing. There's a volatility with this, and just the math on this, there's an element of risk with all these players. You're going to run into ruts where it doesn't work, but you're also going to run into situations you just hit a lot at one point in that, same way, like baseball. And I think as much as people want to be frustrated with some of these picks, they're also contributing. Like Tony Fields is playing football. It's not like Tony Fields can't play dead, and he's not a superstar, but he won you a football game. He won a game. And I don't care that it was the Houston Texans. He won a football game. Donovan Peoples-Jones obviously is like the shining achievement of sort of this approach, premium position, 6th round. It's amazing that he was able to last that long. It seemed like at the time, 4th round was his basement. He's around 6. Huge hit. And I suspect the Browns will extend him in the summer, but we'll see. Tillman sort of gives them some insurance on that. People keep telling me that, Tillman was picked to replace him. I think the Browns are thinking bigger than that. I think they hope he can replace Amari Cooper ultimately in that 2 years from now. I still do think the Browns want to reward Donovan Peoples-Jones. He's like the ultimate team guy. He's gotten better every year. He's also now contributing on special teams with a punt return touchdown. I don't think the Browns are willing to be like, okay, we're done. And Deshaun Watson apparently loves him, and we'll see how that connection sort of works out. But that's another part of it. So for all these reasons, I'm ready to extend Andrew Berry. Done. He's not going to get worse at his job going forward. He's going to continue to get better. And I think the Browns would be wise to basically think about him as your GM for the next 2 decades. He can be the Browns equivalent to Kevin Colbert, the way he was with the Steelers. And you're going to have some years where, you don't get on the picks, which happened to Kevin Colbert at times. But overall, it's about smart process. It's about making the right moves in terms of betting the right way, going with the good averages, and just playing the math in some ways. And that's sort of uncomfortable to listen to be like taking the football part out of it in some ways. as somebody who watches this and coaches it, even if it's only at a high school level, you want to be able to sort of look at a guy and go, yeah, he can play. And that's not taken out of the process entirely, but the way I'm describing it sort of makes it very antiseptic, and it's just numbers as opposed to watching tape and all those things. So I think that part is interesting. Like I said, Kevin Stefanski is the one. This is sort of his year to prove it. I keep getting these things like Kevin Stefanski should be worried about his job. And I don't know how else to explain this to you. As somebody who does this, as somebody who coaches and gets the opportunity to work with players, like if you're Kevin Stefanski and you're looking at all this talent in your building, you are so excited to get to work every day. You're not sitting there worrying about what the Steelers are doing and what the Ravens are doing. Yeah, you pay attention to that stuff. You're months away from that. You're worried about what your guys are doing. And right now, Kevin Stefanski is in year 4, and all these people are like, well, he's got to make or break. Okay, but that's the business that he's chosen. What he's really focused on is he's sitting there going, I had a top 10 offense with Jacoby Brissett last year, and now I have the quarterback I wanted to run it now, and I'm going to build my offense around him. Meanwhile, I got Jim Schwartz to coach my defense, and now Myles Garrett has Za'Darius Smith, Obanya Okoronkwo, Dalvin Tomlinson, and Juan Thornhill, and all these corners, and JOK, and Anthony Walker Jr. coming back, Bubba Ventrone to coach special teams, and you're sitting there going, I love this. I want to coach talent. He's got to be loving the fact that he gets to work with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, a rookie quarterback with a ton of talent. And just all these young guys, and like every day is sort of this new sort of fun thing he gets to do, whether it's working on the offense, whether it's coaching some of these young guys as they head with the mini camp. They've got OTAs coming up. Like this idea that he's like driving into work dreading, what happens if he goes 1-3. That's just not how these people think. That's not how I think in terms of this. I'm not sitting there worried about, what happens if, the high school I coach at is 1-3 to start the season. You have these players and you're just excited to see them work and grow, and you'll figure it out when you get there. You're always going to have sort of an eye towards the future and what you've got to deal with in the upcoming season. But if you are, sort of that living in your fears crap, you're going to hate this as a job. And ultimately, let's say Kevin Stefanski stinks this year and he gets fired. He's got a bunch of guarantees. He's going to be paid to not work. Like, how awful truly would he have it if he fails? But the bottom line is, this is everything he ever wanted in the season, and so he's loving life every day right now. Whatever time he has with his kids and playing basketball with them and whatever avid endorsement crap he does, between that and his football life, he's got it pretty good. And compare that to a team like DeMeco Ryans coaching the Houston Texans. That's what's not fun. And granted, he's loving the fact he's got a 6-year contract that's all guaranteed, and it's his first head coaching opportunity and all that stuff. But like, he's got real things to actually worry about, whereas Kevin Stefanski isn't sitting there going, I don't know who's going to play here at a bunch of positions. I don't know how we're going to deal with this. Now I've got my guys. I get to do what I really love doing, which is figuring it out, getting these guys to play well, and we'll see. Whatever happens is going to happen. Look, losing sucks. It's, part of the business, but you don't want to have that. But this idea that he's terrified of this, I just don't get it. The last thing I wanted to get to is the rumor that Ezekiel Elliott might be on the Browns' radar. I've seen some very strong opinions on this, and most of them are in the negative. And I understand why teams are saying, or why these people are saying that they shouldn't want Ezekiel Elliott. Okay, let's start by saying, if he's getting anything more than basically the minimum or like $2 million, it's a no-go anyway. If you're under that impression that it's like $2 million, let's say, I think it's a more interesting conversation than what I'm seeing, in that, well, he's compromised physically, he's slowing down. True. He is a decent pass blocker and a crappy receiver. I think he's a really good pass blocker, even though, you go to Pro Football Focus and stuff like that and you see grades that are okay. Ezekiel Elliott, when he came out, was the best back in term like that I had ever seen in terms of just being complete. Ezekiel Elliott could do everything. Ezekiel Elliott could block. He could be a fullback if you needed to lead block. He could, operate anywhere in the formations, go out and catch passes and all these other things, in addition to being an elite runner. He didn't forget how to play football. And when you watch him on tape, I think that's the biggest thing you would get with Ezekiel Elliott compared to a guy like Kareem Hunt, who's also sort of wearing down physically. Those type of things that are going on with him, where his running style just has beaten him up, and it looked like he was running in mud last year. Just not it could the tires were spinning, but he just wasn't going anywhere. First things first, where is Ezekiel Elliott's body? That's number one. Is he healthy enough? If there's really a problem, then okay, we can just scrap it. But he's very smart, and where that plays out on the field is not only in understanding pass protection and where he needs to block and understanding where to run routes and some of those things. It's understanding that it's 3rd and 1 or 3rd and 2. I got to go get 2 yards. Ezekiel Elliott's not dancing in the backfield. He goes and gets the 2 yards. He's really good around the goal line because he does those things. And on some level, Kareem Hunt used to be quite good at being a nose for the end zone guy. And Nick Chubb, for all the things he does well, there are times when he will sort of pause and try to find the hole. Ezekiel Elliott will go downhill. Ezekiel Elliott also understands blocking schemes at a high level. He understands how to see where the cutback lane is, or see where he needs to cut and attack in a way that Kareem Hunt couldn't do it. With the Browns incorporating more inside zone along with their outside zone, and then the gap stuff they do, that has some value to me. The other part is Ezekiel Elliott is big. He's basically the same size as Nick Chubb, gives you another power guy. Again, knows the end zone, short yardage, those type of things that are valuable. I like the way Zeke has run out of gun. He's downhill. Maybe he doesn't have the elite burst he had, but from what I've watched, he's still pretty good going right downhill and starting to gain yards. He can still set up moves and make guys miss. He's I think when you get into drops and some of that stuff, some of that's always weird because, you get some of these drops where it's like the quarterback is sort of flustered. He's feeling pressure, and the running back can't figure out if he's still supposed to be pass protecting with the quarterback looking downfield, or if he should turn and look for the ball to catch it. Some of those things can sort of increase your drops and make you look worse than you are. But there are plenty of examples where I can see Ezekiel Elliott is still effective at catching a ball in space and gaining a bunch of yards, or operating a screen, or some of those other little things that you can add to an offense and it might be attractive to the Browns. I don't think the Browns must go out and get Ezekiel Elliott. I don't think that this is like some of the other opportunities they've had where Rodney McLeod was, to me, is a massive boost to this team because he's been a starter for years and years and years. He still played at a high level this past year with the Colts, and now he's your third guy in a group with Grant Delpit and Juan Thornhill. Like, that's a big time move. Or, now having Za'Darius Smith and Obanya Okoronkwo and those things where, the rotation is great. And those are big time must get moves. But I would just say that I think people should be a little more open-minded with the potential of Ezekiel Elliott in the backfield along with Chubb. I think a smaller workload would do him good in that regard. I think that would help save his body and give him a little more juice. Again, obviously it's fair to question how much juice is in there, but even this past season, Ezekiel Elliott had way more touches than Kareem Hunt did. So if you're getting him down to sort of Kareem Hunt level touches with the Browns, I think there might be more than some people are giving credit for. It does not mean he's a game changer. I'm not suggesting that, but I do think he could be a decent second guy that allows you to now have a guy like Jerome Ford be a really interesting wild card, or Hassan Hall if they really like him, or somebody like that. But if you get into a situation where it's Nick Chubb, Ezekiel Elliott, and Jerome Ford as your three backs, and Ezekiel Elliott's, again, you're not making money, it's not hurting you financially, then I think that becomes really interesting for you in terms of what it allows you to do, especially if he's on the minimum, because then it really emboldens you to sort of find where Jerome Ford is good and then find spots where Ezekiel Elliott's going to work. But if Nick Chubb misses a game or misses 3 games or misses, 6 weeks, the combination of Jerome Ford and Ezekiel Elliott is probably going to be fine, even if it's not great, and even if you're not loving it, as opposed to Jerome Ford and Justin Jackson or something like that. And I don't have anything against Justin Jackson. I think he does some interesting things. It's just, I see the attraction and the appeal for a guy like Ezekiel Elliott. And all this is assuming that this rumor is legit, that it really is the Browns and the Chargers that are really attractive to one, that want Ezekiel Elliott and that he wants to play in those places. It's sort of an interesting out there rumor. Obviously he played at Ohio State, could be interesting from that standpoint, but in the same way, why wouldn't the Bengals be interesting in that point? So who knows if it's real or if there's anything to it, but I would just say that the people who are saying a harsh no should probably be a little bit more open-minded to the idea. I think it could do better than he doesn't need to be a feature back. He just needs to be a pretty good second option. And I think his power coming in off the bench after Chubb having so much more speed than him could be really useful. And again, his football intellect is really valuable. I can't stress it enough. Like, go watch him. He does things the right way. And even if you're sitting there going, oh man, I wish he was getting more yardage, fine. With Deshaun Watson in this offense being more spread out, Ezekiel Elliott could be running into very limited boxes and catching passes in space and just being an asset. I think that could enhance his value. I think people forget that this past year, Dallas was really hurt because they didn't have Amari Cooper to open things up. It was CeeDee Lamb and to a lesser extent Dalton Schultz, and they didn't really get much out of their passing game like they had in previous years when they had Cooper and Lamb and some of the other guys that they've had on their team. Last year, I think part of the reason that Zeke's production was down was because their offense was down a little bit. Then that's why they went out and have done some of the things they've done to sort of open things up a little bit more. So I think it's interesting. I'd just leave it at that. But anyway, hopefully, depending on life, hopefully Bree will be back next week. Certainly I will be back. Tons of stuff going up on Browns Digest. I should probably actually, advertise what I do more on this website, on this podcast, since it's mine and Bree's, and I'm really bad at that. But by all means, there's all kinds of stuff going on. We've been pumping out a ton of stuff lately. Help us out. Do me a big favor and subscribe to YouTube. I don't care if you right click it and then freaking turn off the recommendation for the channel. Just subscribe. Help us out there. If you can review the podcast, help us out there. Try to get us to some more listeners and try to build this thing up. This thing goes as far. I will continue to do this as long as it's fun for me, and life allows for Bree to do it. But certainly it helps if we can continue to build this thing and get a little momentum. And it's always interesting, and we appreciate feedback and interaction with fans or people who listen or whatever. But anyway, we'll be back next week. More to talk about. OTAs are coming quickly. But yeah, that's where we'll leave it.